So the goal today is we want to talk about how to send emails out and how that kind of fits in with some of the pictures and things that we've talked about already, namely the authorization and the authentication stuff. So that'll fit into a few things. I think I've already gotten all of you set up with SendGrid, so you should have accounts for that to kind of play around with some of the stuff today. I kind of mentioned this yesterday, but I do be forewarned, if you're logging into SendGrid, you might get banned on campus, so you might try not to do that today. It's up to you to kind of play with it, but just fair forewarning, we had an issue last year. Everybody created the account on campus, and it was a problem. So.
You got banned off the campus email?
Well, everybody's students, like all the students, not our school's email system, but SendGrid blocked all of our accounts. So because we're all in the same IP address.
When you live here,
then we just work through it and we get your account unbanned. So
there's not much I can do. Even like
there's not much you can do. I mean, even setting up accounts with everybody in disparate places yesterday, several people got flagged. So yeah, I think there were several people who got their accounts marked, and I know at least two or three people got the denied, like you did, and so we'll kind of work through that. I'll be generous on time as far as obviously due dates with what this is concerned with. So because of that.
Comparison to other material.
How hard is this? Comparison to other material. This is actually pretty easy.
Is it?
Yeah, it's pretty easy.
APIs, that was like a 9.8. So this is like this is probably like a 2.3, something like that.
I don't know what your.
You agree?
Depends on what your scheme is. So anyway, so there we may run into some difficulty with that just because their security is pretty tight. So why would we want to go send out emails? There's a lot of different reasons we might want to send out emails to our users. It might be as simple as just informing them about activity that's happening on the website. Say maybe your friends are posting things, there's new posts from them, or there's new reviews, or there's a new place to go, a new restaurant in town, or there's new pets up for adoption, or whatever it may be. There's a lot of reasons you might want to send out emails about activity on the website. Some websites also have newsletters that might be weekly or bi-weekly, so this figures into that as well. You might have some sort of urgent reminder to say, hey, you need to do this action immediately, or you might lose your account, account might get locked, or if you're dealing with a bank, hey, you have some unusual, right? Maybe you have your card has been used in another country. You might get some sort of urgent reminder about that, right? If you're making changes to the website, you may need to let your users know about that, right? So you might also send out emails in terms of, hey, here's some updates that just went live. Here's what you need to know about them, or here's the changes that are happening, or if you're building an API that other websites are using, we might need to let those developers know as well. So for sales, if you're talking about e-commerce, that's a common thing. Say, hey, here's our Black Friday sale or Memorial Day sale or whatever it may be. But the two that we'll look at maybe in more depth today are, hey, if you have forgot your password, or if you're trying to verify that user owns a password, those are typically things that somewhere in there you need an email to really provide that authentication mechanism, because they can't you can't just do it on the website itself, right? So those are two things we'll talk about a little bit later on in this, and that's part of why this comes up. So walking back and talking a little bit about history and the different email protocols that are out there and might be things you run into is kind of where I want to start. We won't get too deep on the nitty-gritty of these protocols because we're going to use SendGrid, and that will kind of take care of some of the details, so we won't have to deal with those low-level details of the the actual protocols. Okay. So email's been around for almost 40 years at this point. I think it's actually like 38 years since we had the first email protocol defined. So this is kind of a long-running tool. With that in mind, some of these protocols, well, they have a long history, right? And that's part of why maybe we don't want to touch them ourselves, because of all the things that go into that and the nuances that have, creeped in there over the years. So because there's a lot of gotchas. So the main protocols that are out there and supported in regards to emails are going to be SMTP, POP3, Imap, and MIME. You may have heard those or seen those acronyms somewhere at some point. Those are the kind of the main protocols that are in use. So Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, SMTP protocol, is kind of the original way to send emails. It's the original protocol that's been around since '82. And that actually still exists. Any company that's out there that lets you send emails to somebody else, well, they're sending it over SMTP or some version of SMTP. That's still largely how emails are sent. So it's worth noting that this protocol only includes functionality to send emails, not to receive them. Okay, it's actually interesting because it's broken up, right? So the protocols for actually looking at and working with your inbox, it's a different protocol when you hit the send button, effectively. So there's different stuff that has to happen to actually get the email from one server to another that's not covered by the protocols that deal with just your inboxes. So SMTP is that protocol, getting your email from one server to another. So even if you're sending an email from, say, Gmail to wherever else, it's still going over this. It's worth noting SMTP in and of itself does not include any authentication, which means it's actually really easy to spoof an email address. I think, as you'll see when we build this, I can say the from address is anything I want, and I don't have to necessarily prove that. So I can send an email that says it's coming from google.com, or I can send an email that says it's coming from Ranken.edu. Your email client might flag it, but it won't stop, and it might move it in your junk, but it's not going to stop you from receiving it, actually. So your from address, because there's no authentication, there's no proving that you are who you are, that you are that person that you're claiming to be. You can make the from address anything you want it to be. And the only thing that might happen is it goes into your junk folder, at least if you have a decent spam filter. If you don't, it's probably just right in your inbox, and you're like, oh, I got an email from Troy. Well, Troy didn't actually send it, but it looks like it came from Troy. So it also doesn't include any encryption. There's no encryption in SMTP whatsoever. That means your messages are sent over plain text. So if you send an email over SMTP, anybody on that network, they can see it. They can see the packets going back and forth, and you can read your emails. Right? That seems like a big deal today, right? Both of those things, the lack of authentication and the lack of encryption, both of those things are really important today. Back in '82, when there were only a few number of computers and a few people that are actually able to do that, mostly academics, it wasn't that big of a deal, right? So they didn't pay too much heed to it because it's like, well, I can check that in other ways, right? I have other ways. I can just go over to their desk and check, or odds are there's not malicious actors on the network anyway that can connect to it. So you have those things. So that's kind of our core protocol. And you can still write web servers. You can still write applications that send emails over SMTP. A lot of people still do that. There's another version of SMTP called Extended SMTP. It's actually not really another version of SMTP. It's just some additional things on top of SMTP called Extended SMTP, was first introduced in 95. And it adds a lot of different features and commands to the basic SMTP protocol, which, by the way, the SMTP protocol is entirely text-based. There's no binary data and sending back and forth. You can look at the traffic and read it in a text editor. Same way actually with HTTP, right? HTTP traffic is actually just plain text. So that's kind of a trend from back in that day. ESMTP does add support for Unicode, which is helpful because the base SMT emoji and things like that, and other languages besides English, including German, you can't really actually send German characters in SMTP because it only supports 7-bit ASCII, not even 8-bit extended ASCII. So you can't send umlauts with core SMTP. The original protocol didn't allow for that. So that's kind of important. Base 64 is included in there as well to be able to send binary data, including HTML, because HTML ends up getting base 64 encoded as well. So it also introduces TLS encryption, which you can introduce. TLS is kind of one of those options for doing HTTPS as well. So it's similar sort of encryption scheme. There's also support in there for authentication. So if you're working with extended SMTP, which kind of has mixed support still, some servers support this, parts of this, some relays support it, some APIs support it, but not everybody supports the whole picture or range of what's in extended SMTP.
So you said it doesn't support like German characters and stuff like that. Does that mean like only English countries use this?
So SMTP as originally defined, right? The original version that came out in 82 only supported 7-bit ASCII. So that's where adding Unicode support is important for people, not just in other foreign countries, right? We're not just talking about China, we're talking about Europe as well. They need more than 7 bits to write their characters. So, because I think ASCII has what, 128 characters, that's all you get, which includes all the special characters and the punctuation and the new line characters and break lines, etc. Anyway, so POP was introduced in 84. Current version of that is POP 3, defined in 88. So that one's been around for a long time. That's the protocol that's used by the email clients to actually retrieve your emails from the mail server. So if you want to have like Outlook, one of the options is it can connect over POP. And so it'll connect to any server. Outlook can connect to any server. Thunderbird, I think it is the other one that's put out by Mozilla, or Thunderbird or Firebird? Thunderbird. Thunderbird can connect to any POP server that you have and pull your emails down. Now, pull them off the server. Yeah, you completely download them. Completely download them. So it's worth noting, it was written in 84 and 88. The predominant way to connect to the internet during that time was through dial-up. So with the way that dial-up worked, a few things you might want to know is, and how it still works, is that you generally block the phone line and nobody else can make phone calls during that time, right? Otherwise, you pick up the phone, you get a lot of static, and their internet connection drops off. And then you get a mad screen from the other room. So it was kind of important that you weren't on the internet all the time, right? Plus it costs you something for every minute you were online, and all the data you downloaded. So you wanted to set it up in a way where you could spend most of your time offline. So POP supports that. It sets it up in a way where you can just get on dial-up for a short amount of time, download all your emails, get offline, and then you can read them offline, and you don't have to be online for very long. So that's part of POP. Next protocol. So what do I have in here? Did I not rename something? Why do I have 2 slides for POP?
For clients like Thunderbird, Outlook, are those done?
I think my names are. Oh, yeah. This should say. This should be Imap. I'm like, something's not right because this says POP. What you were saying for clients like Thunderbird?
Yeah, like Outlook and Thunderbird, those dying, or is that kind of holding steady, or?
Outlook's definitely holding steady. So, I mean, most companies, are, especially around here, are all using Outlook largely for their business email. So, is what it is. Imap is another one which was introduced in '86, last updated in 2003. From that, you can kind of tell it's maybe had some more updates, been more active development versus POP3, which has kind of been stagnant. And a lot of that is because the internet's changed, because we don't use dial-up anymore. We have those persistent connections. So Imap makes a little bit more sense. So Imap is just like POP is a way for you to retrieve emails, right? So SMTP is the way you send, but POP and Imap are ways to download the emails.
Internet mail access protocol?
I think it is. I have to go back and look at the article. But the thing that it claims to support, the extra thing that it complains that's where it is above POP, is it allows for simultaneous access to the same mailbox by multiple agents. So that means, like, if you have maybe your account loaded up, if you're actively connected to the email server on multiple people, you can get things like notifications, right? You get a notification that there's a new email. POP does not support that. POP doesn't support, hey, tell me about when there's a new email, because it's designed for log on, get your emails turned off, versus Imap is designed for being on there all the time. So I'd say that one's used a little bit more nowadays, but both of them are supported pretty widely.
Which one do you recommend using?
Well, the long and short of it, as a software developer, you probably won't need to talk POP or Imap, because usually the only thing we care about is sending the emails. We don't usually care about receiving them. If you did care about receiving them, if you did care about building some sort of your own inbox, then you might, but most in part, you're probably not going to do anything with Imap or POP.
No reply email.
So,
Right?
what do you mean?
Most of the messages you send out are going to be like no reply time.
There's not going to be no reply, and in fact, if you needed to handle a reply from the user, you still just need to handle SMTP, because they are going to send it to you as SMTP, and then you can do the stuff with it. So, large in part, I bring these up for just mentioning that they're out there, and you may see them if you're playing with email stuff, but we're not going to do any code with those, and it's very unlikely that you would write a website that would need to deal with either of those two protocols. So the next one up is a little bit different, called multi-purpose internet mail extensions, known as MIME. Oftentimes you'll hear them as MIME types or media types. These are originally visioned in '93, partly as a way to say what kind of content is in an email, such as, is it a plain text content or is it HTML content? But it is also used for saying what kind of attachment did you attach to the email. So you might say, this is a plain text attachment, this is an audio attachment. You need to know, on the receiving side, needs to know what kind of file that you were being sent. So the MIME types are used in that context to know what kind of file it is, because you can't rely on extensions, as it turns out. The 3 or 4 letter extension isn't a reliable thing, and especially at that time, it wasn't necessarily guaranteed that the two computers on both ends agreed on what that extension meant. They might say, okay, that extension is this kind of file, and another thing would say, well, that extension is this kind of file, because it was only based on, well, that extension is opened in this program, right? So MIME is saying what kind of file it is, because we need to know what kind of file it is, not what program to open it up in, because that may be different on both sides. Okay. So it turns out that that is immensely useful beyond just emails. I mean, that's where it started out, but it turns out that that is really helpful beyond just working with emails. In fact, we've already seen it. Remember at some point we said x/plain? Probably seen that at some point. You saw application/JSON. You may have in first semester seen something like this, image/JPEG, video/MP4, audio/MPEG. All of those are MIME types. So it starts with, every MIME type starts with what we call a type and then a subtype. So what kind of thing is it, and then categorized under there, the more specific. The general types that exist are text, image, video, audio, font, and I think there's a few others. Application, if you see that, that's the kind of catch-all. Application, if it starts with that, is like, well, we don't really have a way to categorize this, we'll stick it here. Or oftentimes, if it starts with application, it's you have to have a specific kind of application to use it. So for instance, Word documents, all of the types for Word documents and Excel documents, etc., they start with application because they're not text documents. They're you need a specific application to open them. So these were originally visioned in 1993. Because they've become so useful, they're actually managed by the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority now, which is the same organization that does a lot of things with the internet, including saying, well what ports go with which protocols. Like SMTP is normally port 25, HTTP is normally port 80, so reserving those ports. And I believe they also do stuff with domain names as well, domain name registry, and some of those kind of things. So that they're kind of an important group, but they have a big page where they say what everything is. So actually got it linked here. If you want to ever know what kind of thing something should actually be, what MIME type is, there's a giant thing that they maintain that tells you about each of those different MIME types. So if we were to go look for image/PNG, we could actually go find a whole article about here's what that means, and hey, it's a type image. Yeah, some of this stuff looks pretty old. Last modified 2015. It's in plain text. It's not a very nice website. This is something where we're talking about, this is a standards document. It's not about looking pretty. It's just about deciding what the true number is. What's the right way you should do it. Possibly, that's entirely possible, and that might not be a bad thing. So MIME types will come up a lot. If you want to send anything as far as an attachment, you'll have to specify what the MIME type of that is. And it's also interesting to note, again, this comes up in other places. So when we're sending our responses, you've already seen there's a content type header that says, what kind of thing are you sending back? Are you sending me back an image? Are you sending me back HTML or CSS or JavaScript? So you have to send a content type with that. It also comes into play if you're doing like file uploads, then you get a MIME type there as well. So this can show up in a lot of different places. Given all those protocols, that's kind of the backdrop of what exists out there. The alternative to doing that is there's a lot of APIs that have now been built which function over HTTP. So you can work with a company or pay for their services, and they'll give you a nice REST API or similar that you can use over HTTP to send your emails out. That tends out to be a lot better than just using SMTP directly, even though you can still do that. A lot of these provide some sort of authentication and authorization mechanisms, also including encryption. So you don't have to implement those things yourself. They're provided to you. They also provide queues generally for sending out large quantities of emails. There are some spam limits as far as most email providers are concerned. So oftentimes, if you were to send over 1,000 emails in maybe a day or within an hour, depending on how they decide to implement that limit, 1,000 emails per day will likely get you flagged as spam from there on out. It's like, okay, you're sending a lot of emails. We're going to start sending them to the junk folder. So to work around that, a lot of these providers give you a way to just give them the email, and they'll queue it up and send out all the emails as makes sense. And rather than sending them out all at once, they'll kind of trickle them out there to not go over the limits. So that's great, because otherwise you would have to implement that, right? And that can get very messy very quickly, because it's not the easiest thing to build. So it's better to let somebody else build it.
So that would be an example of using a third-party API.
Yes, third-party API for emails is a great thing.
How easy is that to do to implement a third party? Like, let's just say on our website, got my travel website, I want to have looking at places, hotels in Miami. Right, here's the weather. This is what's going on there. Is that easy to plug into, or is that beyond the scope of this course? Or?
You've already learned how to do it, because it showed you how to do a REST API. Basically, just expose that. You just need some way for them to prove their identity, and that's usually to generate some sort of like API key, which you've already most of you've already generated for SendGrid. So you just have to have a way on your system to say, here's an API key. Use that anytime you connect to my REST API, and then you just hook that into your auth middleware to say, okay, if they give me an API key, then here's how we go check that it's good, right? So basically, we've already talked about how to do it, as much as
I didn't get there.
Okay.
API keys, that's what comes down to.
Yeah. So it's just you would use that API key instead of like a username or password type of thing. But your API key can actually be anything. API key just has to be a string. So make it a JWT token, and you're good, right? So they also provide you support for both plain text and HTML enabled clients. That's kind of important, and that's not necessarily an easy thing to implement directly with at least most SMTP implementations, because sometimes there's still users that are still receiving emails in just plain text. Some packages don't always support HTML. In fact, I think my experience has been sometimes if things go to junk, oftentimes the version that they show in junk is the plain text version, versus what you get in your inbox is the fancy HTML version. So a lot of times you have to send them both. Send them a version that's just plain text, and send them a version that's HTML. Well, suffice to say that Outlook still supports plain text. And sometimes, at least, the simple implementation of that is a lot of people, if they're using SMTP directly, they just write things in plain text when they're sending things out. So anyway, there's less of that now. There's definitely less of that in terms of clients that can't support HTML. But there are occasionally some. So some of these providers, some of these APIs also include ways to provide templates. So you can able to, design it on their website and then put in your data to it. Something like that. But basically you can design it and you don't have to code in. You don't have to have all the HTML code for it on your end. You just say, hey, go use this template, right? And that makes things a lot better in terms of, it means you don't have to put all the presentation logic for your email into your actual application, which suffice to say, your end users change their minds, whoever's managing it changes their mind all the time about what they want to word that email is. And so just having that outside there means that you can say, okay, that's how you want to change the email that we're going to say that. Okay, we'll go make that change. I don't have to go change the code. I would have to go push out a new version, because oftentimes pushing out a new version can be a difficult thing, especially if you're on a team of 5+ people and everybody's got work that's partially done, right? I can't just put out a new version of the website if it's going to have bugs. Does that make sense? So having that separate really helps in terms of that side, because then they can make design changes and such without you having to do a major deploy. So those things are really helpful. So the thing that we'll be using here is something called SendGrid, which is provided by Twilio. And I forget what else Twilio provides, but if I looked at their roster of things, oh yeah, that and that. So they're a pretty well-known company, pretty well established. There's actually a lot of companies using the SendGrid API at the moment. If we go to look at their website, there just is a short list of the people that are using this: Uber, Spotify, Airbnb, Yelp, Glassdoor, Instacart. If you look further into the companies that are using this, it's pretty impressive. So they're supporting a lot of big name clients, which kind of speaks to some degree to the volume, to the value that they provide, right? So we're just going to scratch the surface of the things that we can do here. The only thing we're going to focus on is sending emails, but they can do more things than that, including they've got APIs for sending out text messages, for instance. That's another thing that they can actually do. And as I understand it, it's not that different. So if you can understand the one, you can understand the other. So they've got a lot in there. In fact, they've got some really nice examples of what to do there. I do want to mention a few things here. What happened there? Okay. So they do have a free plan. Their free plan is limited to 100 emails a day. So do pay attention to that when you're testing. In actual use, for the things that we're building, that's a really high limit. You would probably never get to 100 emails per day for the things that we're trying to build, but when you're testing it, it's actually pretty easy to accidentally get up there. I think just yesterday, playing around with things, I sent about 25. So, just trying to set up a small process. So, do keep that in mind. If you have a big error with your code that ends up sending a lot of emails, or you get it wrong a bunch of times, you might hit that. So plan your development time accordingly, because you might get to a point where I'm on 100 emails, well, I'll just have to figure it out tomorrow. I believe it stops you from sending them, although it might flag you and you might get banned if you keep sending them. But yes, it stops sending them, but it does keep track of that you tried to send them. So, so keep that in mind. Don't create more than one account. If you create more than one account, both of your accounts will get banned. Students in the past have tried to work around that. There is not a workaround. You have a student account and a personal email. That's not a way to get around 100 email. You won't get 200 emails. You get 0.
Yeah, because they know your IP address, right?
Yeah, they know our URP address. They're paying
They
attention
don't like
to a lot of
they
things.
don't like VPNs.
Yeah, they don't like VPNs. So just create the one account. Don't create a second. You'll have troubles there if you do. Don't create all your accounts at once. We've kind of dealt that. I've tried to stagger everybody, so we're going boop, 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 boop. So we created a bunch of them yesterday, but we all create them like at once in class. If you're working on the school network, campus network, that's probably going to get flagged. Hopefully they'll see that and resolve it, but that just means that there's some, there may be some issue when we're trying to do a test over this stuff. So we'll just kind of have to work with that. That's where I'm just going to be generous about due dates when it comes to these things, because it's going to be hard to do when we're all together. So we've set up this. Okay. So we've looked at some of the different companies that they work with, some of the companies that they provide services to. But they're really good, as they say, email at scale, which is nice. So they provide the main part that we're going to look at is that they provide a REST API for using stuff with there. Here they've got their example uses curl, something called curl. It's kind of similar to Postman, but it's on the command line. Curl is that's basically what it is. Postman on the command line in one command. So here's a curl. They're sending a request as post. They're sending it to that API. So you can see SendGrid.com version 3 mail send. Okay, that's the API endpoint. You see they've got authorization header bearer. Remember we talked about the authorization header already. So you send the bearer token as that's their API here, API key. Content type, application JSON, and then the JSON data that they're sending on. So all that stuff that's in the data is kind of what actually is the content of the email. Now, we're not going to interface with the REST API directly because, as it turns out, they have a Node package that you can use, which is even easier than that. So the one that you want to install is @SendGrid/mail. That's the NPM package that we'll be using. So there's basically only two methods in there. The first method is set API key. All you do is set API key. You just pass that wherever you have your API key stored. You're going to pass that in. And you'll notice the way that they have this set up is in the example process.env SendGrid API key. Right? So generally speaking, you're going to put that API key in a environment variable and pull it from there. Generally speaking, you don't want to have that in the code. We'll talk about that in a minute. This is kind of a special case, but generally speaking, you don't want to put that number into your code. Same thing with any other API keys that would fall into that thing where it's a secret. Secret is when you so we set the API key, we build up a message object, and so here they're saying it's going to go to test.example.com from test.example.com. There's your subject line, your text, and then you'll notice HTML. So they've got a text version of the HTML and the HTML version of it, which just has the strong tag in it. So it's making it bold. So once you build up that message object, they just say send. So really, as far as SendGrid is concerned, that's the only two methods you need to know. Set API key and send. That's it. That's the whole API. The magic comes in with what you send here. How do you build up this message object, right? Because there's a lot to that. But as far as actually using the API, that's it. It's set your API key. You're going to do response at the top of the file, and then send anytime you need to send a message.
That's the server. Right?
This I would actually put into a separate file. So in my example, I put this stuff into SendGrid.js. So I can reuse it, but yeah, I wouldn't put this code into server.js itself.
Is it the same level as server.js?
Yeah, same level as server.js because you're going to use it kind of across the website, but I wouldn't put this into server.js itself. Same way where we've like broken off DB, we've broken off our database stuff into db.js because it's sort of an external dependency. You know, the database is not really part of our Node application, even though we use it very heavily. So that's where, you know, things like that, external dependencies, I would generally break up into a separate file to kind of isolate that code.
Yeah, you use AWD server.js, so it's good work for you.
Okay, so that's the basic part of the API. Now, how do we use it? How do we get those things set up? So there's a few things you want to do in terms of setting up your account. We'll kind of go through these in pieces. So the first thing you have to do is actually create an account. Next thing you need to do is create an API key with the mail send permission specifically. I think I did those first two steps with close to everybody yesterday. There's a handful of people I missed. I know you had a problem with creating the account, so we'll walk through that later. So those are the first two things you've got to do. Once you get done with that, you then need to set up some environment variables. I walked through part of that with a few people, but we need to walk through that with everybody. In addition, there's some additional environment variables I want you to set. We'll then go through updating the configuration files. Remember that that's usually where we pull stuff out, where we pull configuration. We don't usually, we don't necessarily want to connect to the environment variables directly. So that's where, remember, in the config file, we've got our default.json and our environment variables.json and our development.json and things like that. So we'll update those files a bit with some things for configuring this. Next, we need to install the SendGrid mail, that npm package. Then we can finally, once we've got all those things in place, we can actually try sending some emails out. And then when we're done with that, we can talk about how to build out dynamic templates, which is where you can actually take content from your application and put it into the email. Okay, so that's kind of the overview of what we're going to talk about. Okay, so again, I think most of you I've walked through creating an account. Darnell, I know you haven't. Do you want to try and create that now? Once you do, you'll need to create an API key. Kind of the instructions are here on the slide for how to do it if you haven't done it yet. What I want you to do is create one API key for yourself and another API key for me. So you end up with two API keys. The benefit of using that is it's the only way it's supported nowadays, but it's a way to kind of have basically your login credentials without providing your login credentials, right? So rather than hard coding your username and password for your SendGrid account into your application, you use an API key instead. And the benefit of that API key is you can limit the permissions that it gets. So for instance, with us, we'll limit it to just being able to send emails and do nothing else. So it would be very tight permissions. It won't be able to change your password or anything else like that. The other thing with API keys is you can easily turn them off and say, delete the API key, and now that API key is no good anymore. So if somebody gets your API key, right, if for some reason you have a security breach or of some sort, and some malicious actor gets that key, you can just delete it and start over, and their access is gone. Versus if you have a username and password and that gets breached, that's a bit more serious, right? So it provides a lot of safety to be using an API key. And in general, if you're using any third-party service, you should be using an API key. So if you're hooking into the YouTube APIs, you'll be using an API key. If you're hooking into Twitter APIs, you'll be using an API key, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Facebook, it's all that same way now. If you're writing something for a video game, you're probably going to get an API key from them. If you're writing something for, I think even my thermostat, I can get an API key for my thermostat now. So this is a common technique that's used. So if I go into my account, just to kind of show you where this is going to be, Darnell, where are you at? Telling you can't get the account? Unless, of course, that email's already used. I don't know. But so anyway, once you get your account created, again, most of you have already done this. What you're going to do is go down to Settings, and we'll go to API Keys. And from there, you're going to say Create an API Key. The API key has to have a name. What it is doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect your code in any way. The only thing we put into the code is the actual API key that we get out of this. But the name of it doesn't matter. So if I put in as test, what I want to do then is select what kind of level of permissions does it have. So they've got a few different ways. The default here is full. Full says it can do absolutely everything. Don't create an API key with those permissions. You do not want to do that. Because, there's a lot of things that this can do. And notice that it says, for all parts of your account, excluding billing and email address validation. So that's a little bit restricted, but not very much. Where?
Right there.
Oh, patch. Yeah, that's an HTTP message. Honestly, I haven't used it, so I'm not entirely sure what that is. I'm going to guess that that's probably trying to tweak email in flight or something like that. Like, oh, quick, fix it before it goes out. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure what patch is. I think patch is, the idea with patch is that you change content in a page. It was what it was meant for. Anyway, we won't use it. Billing access, that's another level. If you have an account or a system that somehow needs to look at the billing, that's also out of the scope of what we're doing here. So we're just going to do restricted access. If you pick restricted access, then you get to pick, it only gets to do A, B, or C, or D. So there's a bunch of permissions in here. They've got one for API keys. And this says, can you read or write potentially? If I were to turn this on, then this API key can create more API keys. So that's probably not a permission you want to turn on, but that one exists. There's things for alerts, etc., etc., etc. So the only one we need is this one here. Under mail send, it's called mail send. That's the only permission you have to actually send out emails. All the other permissions are for doing other things. So for most applications you built with SendGrid, you probably won't ever need any of the other ones, to be honest. Because most of those fall into things like, well, if I needed something to somehow manage my SendGrid account indirectly, those would be helpful, but most of those fall under the account management sort of side. Okay. So we're going to say create and view. That will give you a code like this, which if you click on it, will copy it, and the done button is enabled. You want to make sure you save that, because again, as it says on there, you can't get it back. Once you leave this page, it's gone. You can't get back to this number here. So make sure you save that. I'm going to go ahead and hit done. I don't want to use this key, so I'm going to just go and delete it right away. Here we go. Boop. Delete API key. So if anybody picks that up from the YouTube video, it's already gone. because it's already been disabled. So that's how you go about creating the API key. Fairly simple. It's basically a long random string. From there, the next thing we need to do is set up some environment variables. So in Windows, you'll want to go to env, type in env. That should open up the system properties window. You're going to click on environment variables. That's going to pop up here. And so what you want to change, you need a few things in there. So you want to set your API key, you want to set the from, and you want to set the to. So in there, set your SendGrid API key, set that environment variable to the API key that you got. That's going to be your API key, and you want to set SendGrid from to your email address, as well as SendGrid to your email address.
You have that down there? I guess not, because you're not supposed to send them on the school network, right?
What do you mean? I already have these three things on my computer.
I didn't see SendGrid in there.
Okay.
Yeah. You didn't scan them a lot of music.
Okay.
You want to do that right now?
Yes, please do that right now. Please go set those three.
And it's not long.
So Darnell, you'll still be able to set up the from and to. If you would go ahead and do those right now, even though you won't have the key.
These are user variables.
Yes, these should be user variables. So that's going to be here. Here it looks like emails are coming from. And two is basically a workaround. We use that as a workaround so we're not actually sending out emails to your grad people.
This is for our website, though, right? So something like I'm doing a travel website, trip advocate, admin tripadvocate.com.
Yeah, usually that's what you end up having as your from. With anything like TripAdvisor and your reply. The thing is, and this is why we're using this as an environment variable, what you do in development is not the same thing as what you do in production. So when you go put it out on, say, Roku, then you would set it to TripAdvisor at more reply, but for testing it locally, you want to change it to this.
Okay. And I can't get the API, don't do it.
But you can set up, you just create the thing with the
Don't like it? It's not letting me, it's grayed out.
Okay, well then, no, SendGrid from should still go in.
Okay, I just changed it. Probably don't let me do the API. Sorry, I wanted to know.
Yeah, so don't put it in the API.
Alright, so just put my email address.
Make sure when you close that out, you hit OK on all three files. So make sure you hit OK on the last one. So once you've gotten those three, environment variables in there, the thing that you'll want to do is make sure that you OK out of all of those boxes that you had open. You also need to make sure that you actually close Visual Studio. And if you have 3 Visual Studios open, you need to close all of them. Because unless you close Visual Studio, it won't pick up the new environment variables. Huh?
Are we adding those to like the config file?
Yes, we'll be using those in the config. So once you've restarted VS Code, we've got some changes that we need to make to the actual application. So first up, in the environment variables, custom environment variables, we're going to add another section. So remember, we have a section for A2P, we have a section for auth. We're going to add another section, call it SendGrid, and here's what I wanted you to add into there. So we're saying there's an API key, we're going to pull it from the API key variable. We've got from coming from there to, we've also got a secret, which we're going to use when we want to generate JWT tokens. This is going to be a different secret than what we have for authentication. And then we're going to have a place for templates. I just have curly braces. So we put some stuff in there. Is it the same thing like the production, which it has to have? No, it's we're putting in placeholders for that actually. Oh, it's just that your numbers will be different than my numbers, which is why I want to. So you do want to come to the section. Who's still typing? Okay.
Did I miss creating environment variables? Did we not have to create the secondary SQL? Was that not one?
Huh?
That we just
So we're not setting this one in development. So these are the only three we need to set in development. We'll set that if you were deployed to Heroku, that's where you would set this. You would set this in Heroku.
I was just like, I don't know if I missed them in the last slide. Or...
Yep. Nope. That is entirely intentional. So if I put it out on Heroku, if I put it out in production, I want to have a very long random string, but I don't want to put that anywhere in my code base because I want to keep that secret, right? So that's where, but we don't actually need that for development. We're going to set a very short one in one of the files.
So we just go into default, that and that one.
Yeah. You could set up a SendGrid secret environment variable as well. That would be fine. We just don't have to because we're going to put it in to one of these files. Okay, so that's what goes in our environment variables file. Here's what we need to put into default. Blank. So yes, largely blank, which this is a little bit different than what we've done in the past, right? Because usually when I put things in default, I give it a default value. But you'll notice I'm defaulting everything to blank. Empty string. So it's basically what we had on the previous slide, just yank out all the values.
Except for the empty object.
So the reason for that is because none of these values we don't want any of these values to have a default value when we deploy the application. We don't want to have them pre-populated with something. I want to be forced to fill in those values on my production server. So I don't want to have a default value that might accidentally be used.
So if you don't want default one thing,
Just to make sure that they're set as empty string and not null or undefined. That's all. Just to make sure that they're empty string instead of null or undefined. And basically saying, yes, I mean to have these in here, and I mean to have these blank. I'm doing this intentionally. So the API key, I want to be forced to set an environment variable. The from should be something that I set in production. I don't want to just assume, hey, maybe I'm using John Doe at blah blah blah, and from doesn't. If I put a from in there, let's say you have 5 developers on the team, maybe each of those different developers don't want to have the same default email address where it's coming from. So that's to avoid things getting in there accidentally where it's coming from joedeveloper@gmail.com when you go to production. Does that make sense? That way you won't accidentally have emails coming out from the wrong email. That's why I'm doing that. The 2 is actually an intentionally blank. What I'll show you when we get into the actual code, what I'm using the 2 for is in development, right? Normally in production, you want the email to go to your actual user. But in development, you generally don't want that. Generally, you want it to come back to yourself instead of them. So by giving an environment variable in there, I can say, well, if I'm working in development, send it to me instead of sending it to them. Does that make sense? So that's a workaround for doing development work, because we don't actually typically want this. We don't want to accidentally send out an email to our users from our development environment. So that's how I work around. The secret, we're starting out as blank. This is similar to the whole previous thing. I don't want to accidentally use a weak secret or a leaked secret in production, because that would be a major problem. So I'm making sure that you have to set the secret, because otherwise I could put it out in production and it's using 123 as the password, and now nothing's secure, and all my data is stolen. So let's keep that from happening. Templates, again, this is the placeholder because I haven't put in value. I haven't created templates yet. Now, remember that so far we haven't put anything in development. This is actually a really good time to start putting something into your development file. And here's what I'm going to put in my development file. I'm going to put in development because I want to use these values in development. I don't actually want to use them in production. I'm going to put my from, my to, and my secret in there in the development file. So that way it will get used for local development, but it won't get used in production. I don't run the risk of accidentally using it. So that's how I would set that up. So it's going to by default go to if you don't set an environment variable, if you're testing it locally, it's going to go to this email address, come from that email address. I would also ask in here that you actually put, I forgot to update the slides on this. I would also ask in here that you put the API key that I asked for you to create for me in this file as well. Here, exit. So let me call it API key. So I would also like to see in here API key. So put in the key that I asked you to create for me yesterday. If you don't have that value yet, just go ahead and put something placeholder in there for now.
that secret that I put there doesn't have to be the same thing. I believe this email secret doesn't have to be the same thing. It just needs to be something that's different than what you're using for authentication.
So those are your configuration files. Any questions on that so far? Why we put the different things into those different files? So now that we've set up that, next step would be to actually go and install the SendGrid package. So if you're in VS Code, we're just going to type npm I and for install SendGrid at SendGrid/mail. So once you finished up the configuration files, that's what you want to do, is install that npm package. And this should not have okay. So now that we've done all that setup, we can actually try sending an email out. So what I would do is create a new file and call it test or SendGrid test, and put this code into it. Probably call it SendGrid test, put this code into it, see if it works.
Actually get.
Let's see that.
So we have to put FUs in server.
What do you mean?
That's it.
Just create a new file, put this in here.
SendGrid.js.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. Just call it SendGrid.js. And what you'll do is the way you start this up, you just say node SendGrid.js.
Okay.
So you're just testing that your API and stuff, API keys and such are good.
And we'll send an email to yourself.
Mm-hmm. So Paul and Darnell, you can go ahead and create this. I'll give you a key to do this part with. Sheridan, did you get your account created successfully?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
I didn't say anything about it being wrong, so.
Okay. And you got some API keys out of it?
Yep.
Okay, good. So Darnell and Paul, check your thing. Cool. That way you can still follow along at least with part of this. What I would do is take that key that I gave you and put it in your put it in here and in your development.js config. Don't put it in your Windows environment because
I couldn't even spell it.
that in a function. Let me edit this. Oh, you're right. Yeah. Yeah. If you just take off the word await, it'll work. Yeah.
Is the await, I forgot the await keyword all works in root context, and well, it doesn't have one to also we take away, and we'll put it back on the series comment, like that, paste it. So just change that last line to sg.now.
Send a object promise. Yeah, that doesn't seem like the right thing. It did work though.
Yeah. Okay. And do you want us to just check and see if we got that?
Yes.
Yeah. So you do click on SendGrid, message. But you just then we'll just run it once. And just
You wait for it off the line.
remember Node on reruns. We'll run after 7.
I'm always suspicious.
It should work. That's so that this is something. Yeah, that's. Okay. So that's the example is.
Yeah, mine is not like.
Okay. Okay. Something about that for. So yeah, if you went to your account, you probably see up at the top was the ticker in yellow that says your account is under review. And so if your account is under review, you're going to get forbidden with everything you do.
Careful with this message. It's a spoof message.
Okay. So what that means is we can't really test it today, but we can walk through what the code does. So kind of looking at this, I've set up a debug. We know about that. I'm bringing in the SendGrid mail package. I'm requiring it. I'm setting the API key. So here we're just hard coding it in, not using config yet. And then I'm saying my message is it comes from here, goes to there, subject, text, and there you go. That's kind of the simplest version of setting how to do it. Okay, you just hard code in all the values. And so the only things that really matter is calling API key at the beginning and calling send. Set API key is you only ever have to do it once in the entire runtime of the application. Send, obviously, you need to call every time you want to send a new message. So this method here, we can call this one in the global scope. We don't need to call this anytime we need to send an email. Does that follow? So only ever need to call set API key once. And it'll remember our key. So usually what I'll do is introduce some methods. So here I'm going to introduce a method called sendMail. It's an async method. And well, what parameters do we need? What are going to change every time we send an email? Well, the from is not going to change because basically for the whole website, I'm usually just going to use the same from. So I'm not going to have that as a parameter. But I need a to, a subject, text, and HTML. Right? So those are kind of my inputs.
You want us to write this down even though you can't test it? Or
We're not yet. In fact, I've got all of this stuff in my example code.
Just give them the key you gave us. It worked for me.
Huh?
They have the
Okay.
same key.
Well, my account's not under review. My account's not under review. So that's a different story.
So if you shared it, it would be.
Possibly, yes. If I shared it broader than 2 people, then everybody might have gotten forbidden. But yeah. So at least my code is not in error. It's just that SendGrid is saying that this looks fishy. I can kind of make this a standardized method so that I can call send email from anywhere, and I probably would want to export this. As I was saying previously, this code is available all in the auth examples stuff. So if you look in the auth examples, you'll find there's a SendGrid.js. So as well as being so I'm going to bring in the config package, and this is how I'm going to bring in the configuration stuff we set up already. So rather than calling, when I call set API key, I don't want to call it as just putting in the hard coding the key. I actually do want to bring it in for the configuration for the environment variable. So I'm going to do that in here, config.get, SendGrid.api. Because you'll remember it's in that SendGrid larger object, and then it's a property API. Okay, so we bring that in. I'm going to bring in the from is just always going to come in from SendGrid from. So I'm going to just say every email we send out comes from that email that we've configured in the email.
And it's async. Is that supposed to be async?
Yes, this definitely needs to be async.
Why? Why is it?
Because I'm actually going to do a wait here, and I do need to do a wait here.
Why?
Because I want to wait for the email to be sent so I can see if the email succeeded.
Okay.
Right? Otherwise, I can't tell. If I don't await it, then I don't know whether or not the email went through.
Oh, okay. Trust me, I believe. But
Yeah. Yeah.
if you just say sgmail.send, then it will go ahead and send it. It won't wait until it's sent, and it won't wait until you have a response from the server to say, was this even accepted? Because it could come back and say forbidden, and at that point, if you didn't say wait, this would just keep going. So the wait says, let's stop if there's an exception like that forbidden. It's like something went wrong. So with the two, here I'm doing something a little bit different. So I'm saying with the two, config.get SendGrid.to. So if that configuration has been set, we'll use it. If it's not set, then we'll use the two. So basically, in production, the way I'm going to set this up, I'm going to have SendGrid.to just be empty string. So there's not a value there. So in production, it'll actually use the two that it's supposed to. But in development, we'll have it go to this. Does that make sense? Rather than going to the user's email address, I'm making this go to the developer's email address. Does that follow? So that's an easy way to make, if you set it up this way, then everything, wherever you're sending emails out, you always go to you when you're testing rather than going accidentally to your customers. Right? Because the worst thing to do is, and I've seen this happen, the worst thing to do is send out emails from your development environment as you're trying to test the feature to 100 different of your users. That's not a great thing. It has happened to me, has happened sometimes. You get complaints immediately thereafter. It's like, why did this service go out? Because I was testing. I'm sorry. So this is the way you work around that.
Why is it or two?
Huh?
I'm not getting why. Why wouldn't it just be good enough just to put config get SendGrid? Yeah, like that. Why or?
Because I want it to send to the actual users when I release this. Otherwise, it's always been going to this one account.
How would it know which one to go to though?
Well, the or checks falsy, right? So if this is empty string.
That's the development one, right? So when it's in production.
Yeah, this is the development one. This is for production.
So it's not an empty string, right? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So in development, there is a value here.
Yeah.
In production, there's not a value here, so it uses that.
If it's in production, would there be no development file, or how would it develop?
The development file is still there, but it does not use. What you do is there's an environment variable in Node. It's called node_env. You can set development or production. So if it's set to development, it uses the development file on top of default. If you use the production, if node_env is production, then it uses the production file over on top of default. Default always gets used. So, and by the way, that node_env environment variable also makes things a lot quicker for a lot of different packages. So a lot of different packages pay attention to that. So if you are going to deploy a real world website, you definitely make sure you say node_env production. So that's worth noting. But by default, if I remember right, node environment defaults to development, which is what we're in. Okay. So that's just kind of parameterizing those pieces. Does that make sense? So I'm parameterizing the from address and the to address and the API key. That way they get pulled from the configuration that we set up. Okay. So we've talked about the basics of how to send emails. And you can actually do pretty much anything with just this, right? If you just know how to do this, you can actually do anything, because you can say, well, here's the text and here's the HTML. You know, from there you can actually build anything. But what I'd like to show you how to do is use something called dynamic templates. Okay, so dynamic templates are given and give us a way to design emails that are a lot nicer. In fact, as it turns out, they actually become handlebar views, because you can actually put things in, like, you know how we've done the double handlebars and the triple handlebars? It becomes basically like a handlebar view, because you can put the double mustache, the the triple mustache in there anywhere you want to put content. So you can actually say, okay, here's the special dynamic content that's different from user A to user B, and put it in there, but you don't have to write all of it in code. So the place where we're going to start is we're going to create an email design. Okay. So before we create the dynamic template, we're going to create an email design. So we're going to go to the design library to do that, and that'll give us a baseline design for all the emails that we're going to send out. It's worth noting that these designs can't actually be used to send an email. They're just to provide a baseline. You create them first, and then you can create a template from that design. So what you actually send out is the dynamic template. This is just creating a standard of the way we want things to look. So I'm going to hop out of the slideshow here and walk through where this is at. You do need to have a SendGrid account for this part, so if you don't have it yet, go ahead and just follow along, because you'll have to do this on your own.
I see what you mean too about exceeding 100 emails. I've already sent 3 out, just like by accidentally saving a file.
I would recommend not running that with NodeMon. Please don't run that with NodeMon. Run it with Node. Because if you run it with Node SendGrid or Node SendGrid test, that will only run it once, and then you specifically have to tell it to rerun. Versus NodeMon would be a problem. Okay, so I've already created a template here. You can see I created a design. So, but let's create one together. So you're going to go down to Design Library, SendGrid, and then you can create your own from scratch, or we can go over to SendGrid email designs and start from one of theirs, right? So let's take the easy approach, and let's kind of start with one of the ones they have. Okay, which one should we start with? Anybody here or online? Tell me which template we should start with.
Do the first one.
Do the first one? Off-Grid Adventures. Okay, so if we look at this one's kind of already built, and you can see it's got a few things in there. So we've got a logo up on top, which is usually a good thing to have. They've got an image, they've got some text, they've got a button, and they've got some more images on the bottom. And then they've got like social media, unsubscribe, and unsubscribe. So that's kind of a pre-built out of the box one. It's one of the nice things about their designers. You can actually view it in a few different formats. So this is the desktop view. You can also flip into mobile and see what this would look like on mobile. Yay. As it turns out, a lot of browsers, a lot of email clients, while they can support HTML, they don't ever, none of them support basically the entire HTML spec. So if you're using webmail, you're in a browser. If I'm using Gmail and I'm in Chrome, well, obviously I've got all of that. But Outlook, for instance, doesn't support all of HTML and CSS and JavaScript. I don't think it supports any JavaScript. So you are limited a little bit on what you can use, and especially if you're looking at CSS3 features, those might not be supported in every email client. So you do need to be kind of aware of that. If you're writing your own CSS or writing your own HTML, you do have to support clients that maybe are not as up to date as your web browser. So another benefit with using a designer, because then you're only using things that have been tested. But if you're writing the code yourself directly, it's very easy to get into something that works for one person but doesn't work for another. So that's where we're going to use a designer. So you can see desktop, mobile, but you can also see the plain text version. If for whatever reason your email client doesn't support it, this is what you're going to see as the plain text. So it automatically is generating this for us. Does that make sense? We won't actually have to create the plain text version. We just mess around with the nicer HTML version, and it gives us the plain text for the most part. So that's super helpful. Okay, so if we want to start from that, I think we just say duplicate design. We can then get two options. So anytime you're working with a design or a template, you can either use the design editor or the code editor. If you use the code editor, you're directly editing all the HTML. I would advise against that one and just use the designer. Designer's not perfect, but it won't get you into things where you're using features that aren't supported across a lot of browsers. So it kind of limits the CSS that you're getting into. So I would start with the design editor. Okay. All right, so let's say we're starting with this. Well, I might want to change a few things, right? Looking at this, I probably maybe want to change the logo, right? So our example this semester I think has been cowboy boots. So let's go grab a cowboy boot and stuff it in as the logo. So let's see if I can go out to Google and find a cowboy boot to put in there. I'm going to go filter this so that I am images. There we go. So images, I want to go to tools, usage rights, and commercial and otherwise. Well, no, I wanted not commercial and otherwise. I want Creative Commons. Okay. So grab a picture. Maybe we'll just take that one. Save image. Oh, that's a giant image. I probably don't need something that's 4K. Let me get something that's smaller.
You don't automatically resize it for you?
I don't remember if it will or not. Maybe I'll just take this one. Well, except the last cartoon image that I tried to go for was 4K. So I'm going to say save this one to my downloads. And let's replace this image with the one that I just got. So I'm going to click on it. It's going to go over here and show you stuff about the module that we're working with. You see I've already got some images uploaded. So once you upload an image, you can easily just use it anywhere else. But I'm going to go and upload that image that we have. So choose image to upload, cowboy boots. Okay, insert, there we go. So I've got it up here. And you can play around with a few different things. So if you look on the left panel, you'll see that there's, for instance, with that image, you could make it potentially a link. So you have a place to enter a URL for it. If it represented text, well, we could put some alt text there. So we're kind of indirectly editing the HTML, if that makes any sense. So cowboy boots. We've got some padding on the top and bottom. I'm going to change that to 0 and 0 and 0 on all sides. You will notice that they do their measurement here in pixels, which is kind of an interesting thing because usually I would say use EM or REM when you're writing padding. Any idea why they're using pixels there for their padding? Why is that the only option for your unit?
Just to dumb it down. Because most people are not going to understand what an edit is.
Actually, much simpler than that. So if we go back to the internet of the 90s, any ideas of what units we had in CSS in the 90s? Well, we had pixels. We definitely had pixels, and we had points. And those are the two you can count on. Is that anything that supports HTML or some version of CSS probably understands pixels and points. So that's basically why they're doing that, is because every email client understands pixels. Huh? Yeah, they want safe. Yeah. So it's like, let's just keep it with pixels because then we know it's going to work. Of course, then you have DPI problems, but that's a whole other deal. Also on this here, you'll notice that they've got a flag for image responsiveness. So you can say, well, I want it to scale responsively or not, which, as it turns out here, I think if I, yeah, so if I turn it off, then you can specifically set that it's, width and height pixels. I'm going to just leave it on. That's the easier one. I'm going to say this is also center aligned. So you can change a lot of these modules just by selecting it and changing the properties. If you want to move any of the modules around, you'll notice as soon as I hover over one of these, you see how there's that kind of crosshair. So you can actually just pick up a module, and if I do it right, I can drag it up. There it goes. So you can rearrange the modules just by dragging them around like that. So I'm going to remove this image here. I'm going to say, well, what do we want to have this top text here say? Maybe I'm just going to say this is title text so I can use it later. Maybe this is my body text. I can adjust the font size over here. So they've got it set to 24. They've got it set to 22. We might want to play around with the colors a little bit. So like they've got a background color here. What would make good sense for a background color for this cowboy boots? A brownish color?
Yeah, or maybe a turquoise.
Turquoise? Let's see if we can get a turquoise. Somewhere in here?
Maybe a western theme going.
Maybe. Okay. I might do both. So maybe I'll set this, maybe I'll set that there, and maybe we'll set, well, where do I get to brown? I always forget where brown is in terms of somewhere in there. It's kind of an orange. And so it's got the color code here. So I can go take that and put it on here. Oh, I don't want that to be the border. I wanted that to be the background. So maybe the button color, where's the color of the button? Oh. What? Go for it. So you just kind of play around with the colors and the stuff until you get it to something that makes sense for the application that you're building. So that's what I want you to do for whatever you're building for your lab application and such.
Pretty easy and fun compared to messing with something like.
Yeah.
Just go ahead and bootstrap the Flexbox.
I'm going to remove some of these things. Turn the address line off. Copy that. Go down here. Okay, so there we have something. So once you get it to the level where you want it, you can then go in the preview and kind of look at it. I did mention that you can inject content. So for instance, if I go to the design in a lot of these different text fields and places, here I can say, well, I want to inject something, maybe the username. So I might say welcome username, kind of like I would do with the handlebars view. If I go to the preview, you'll see it kind of disappears. I need to click on show test data, and show test data will let me define a JSON object that I can kind of use to pre-populate and see what it would look like with the dynamic data in there. So I can say username colon there's what I have in there as far as test data is concerned. Oh.
That's cool. It's just like VS Code. So there's your handlebar stuff with comma, and then another one, right?
Yeah.
Or like if you wanted title, address.
Yep, just comma and other pieces. Yep.
And how does it look in the text? Can you actually type username with the curly braces?
So that's how it's going to come out. But you just said curly braces.
Okay. Where does it get the list from? How do you get the list? What
do you mean the list?
Well, like that's John Doe, right? You have that 100 million. Where's that?
Well, basically, this is an email, right? So, your email is kind of going to be one-to-one with here's a data object, right? So we'll see how to send that on the code side. But basically, you just give it. It's like, hey, I want to send out I want to send out the email, and here's the data that I need to add to it. Okay, so I'm going to give people some minutes to go and work at this and design. You want to design a template for both of your projects, and you'll also want one for your test. So go ahead and you can work on those three. We'll also kind of incorporate the break in this, so if you need to go take a break, get some food or things like that. Let's say we come back at 3 o'clock and we'll do the next piece, so you have some chance to kind of play around with the designer. Okay, so let's get back and let's look at the next part. So we've designed, we've created a design. The thing that we need to now do from that design, we're going to create some dynamic templates. So dynamic templates will kind of give you something like this. And that's where we can kind of start setting things up. So from here, what you want to do is go back. So currently we were in the design library. What you want to do is go under Email API. You're going to click Dynamic Templates. So go to Email API and then Dynamic Templates. You won't have any here yet, so you'll need to create them. So for instance, here I'm going to create a new dynamic template up in the top right. And so I'd give that a name. So let's say I'm going to create this for verifying passwords. So I would say cowboy boots. So I know what website it goes with. Cowboy boots. Password or verify password. So I'm going to give it a name for me. Okay. So if you look at it right now, you should see that there is a template ID here. And that number will change as you make changes to the thing. But that's the number that we'll end up putting in the code. That template ID is the one that we have to take and put into the code. It starts with a D dash. Make sure you bring that D dash over when we go put it into the code. But let's say add version. Okay. Now when you go into add version, you'll see that it brings up all these designs, right? So you can start with either any of these designs that they've created, or you can start with one of your own designs, right? So that's where we set this up. So I can create the dynamic template now from that design. So I'm going to hit select and use the design editor again. Okay, now what I had previously created was just kind of a generic kind of thing to use for my emails. Now I want to create the specific email here. So what I want to do, let's say this is the version name. Maybe I'm going to call this v1. The subject is what I want it to be. So I might say, like, please confirm your email address, or please confirm your account, something like that. And then what you put in the pre-header, the pre-header is what your users are going to see in their inbox before they open it. Does that make sense? So the subject and the pre-header is what they're going to see before they click on it. And those really can be anything. It's just that's what they're going to see. Then that's why that's there. Okay. So I'm going to say please confirm your email address and link inside. Now I might put, yeah, no, I'm going to leave that as yes. So we can put in here, let's see. So I'm going to say maybe welcome username. In my body of this, I say, please click the button below to confirm your account. And then I might change the button text to be confirm account. Now in the URL, the URL is something I really want to be dynamic, right? So the URL is not going to be the same every time this goes out. So, well, I need to put curly braces in there to somehow allow a variable in there. Okay. So one thing I could do is I could kind of type it in and just have token at the end. I think that's the way I wrote the code. Is I basically said localhost blah blah blah. The other way you could just say is curly braces and say this is maybe the URL. So if I put curly braces URL, I can inject something in there when I actually send it. So I can test that out. I'm going to go over to preview. Say the username is, maybe changes to John.2, and the URL is something like HTTP. So I can put a URL in here. try to click on the button now, it should take me to Google. Or at least I can hover over it and you can see that it comes as google.com. So the most important thing basically is you have a way to inject the URL for the button. You have a way to inject the link. Questions? If you go to preview, you can kind of hover over it and it'll show you it. But I had put into the test data that it just point to google.com and check that it had that URL. But yeah. So once you got that to the place where you want it to be, you just hit save, and then you'll go back. So you see I have this ID now. That's what I need to take and put in my account, put in my code. So if you want to go back here, remember we created that template section? So I'm going to open up the default file, and I'm going to put in the template IDs there. So your template IDs will be different. These template IDs won't work for you. You'll need to use the ones from your own account. So I'm saying I've got like a verified email template, and the ID of that is here. I've got a reset password template, and then the URL is there. So you can set both of those templates up the same way I have. Yeah, right there. I just pointed it at people.com. It should show that. So something's up. You might need to do it. Yeah, put it as a full email, like HTTPS or
I know what I'm doing.
okay, it's working.
And then it's just this one.
Yep. So you should grab that. You plug it in. So what I would do is just put curly braces, and then you can pass the entire.
I just figured since it was stay the same, like yours is a verified to change the baseline.
Well, what I need to do is
You can have this one. So what is this one?
so then save this one. I would still have more of them.
production versus the development one. Yeah. And then when you push that to our page, that's what they do. But our code is yeah, you go back. Yeah, so go back and
Yeah, you see it on it.
so you have one you know, they don't even accept these programs. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the drawback.
I click on mine. Okay, like yeah, so pattern, because there's a do we really need to do that? Actually, do we need one? We still have it.
No.
Oh. I thought you said sound word. Yeah. So when I was creating, I didn't create everything. No, because you need yes.
Probably set the URL. Explain that. So, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I know it works.
See it? Test it.
Yeah, I found that. But after that, just work kind of like.
Where it is.
Oh, okay. Alright, so that was what I was missing that part. And then, here, right? And then what do I do?
Yeah, so you put in the, so that's a confirm email, and you should have another one, you know, for like reset.
Oh, okay. I tested it out. No, I didn't do one for this, but oh, okay. No, right?
This is not hooked up to SendGrid. We're just saving. We haven't changed the code.
Yeah, before, it's automatically, it's under review. Does that automatically come undone later?
I can contact all that comment. I think you did yesterday.
Yeah, but that was before. Okay, yeah, I'll contact.
I got that from, once you create a design, you're gonna know that, because the dynamic inputs is what you actually see. The design is just kind of like laying it out, like, this is what I want to look like on the website. Okay.
Yes.
Save that. Okay, so it should be. Marketing is like mass shooting things out to a lot of users, whether or not you have to have
Hey Mo.
purchase transactions. Like you did something, response. I would just think it's credit. That would still be marketing. So that's what that section was for. The other thing I would recommend is change your custom environment variables to give those a way to override them. Right, so we set the actual numbers in default. I would add I would do that as well. So we take the IDs and put them inside, say, hey, like this is SendGrid template, verify email, SendGrid. Put it in our computer. You don't need to put it in your computer. That's just so like extra check. The reason I would do that is then, say you have a deployed version of this website, you could just change the environment variable. Change that. You don't need to put those environments. If you do, then you'd be forcing it to probably the same for all of your and this thing website. Okay, so once you've got the configuration set up, and that's all I would say there is in default, you want to put in the actual IDs, and then just in environment variables, that just gives you a way to change it in the server environment if you need to. But that's not strictly necessary. That's a nice to have. That's not something we won't actually end up sending those environment variables. But so this is really the only one you have to do. Going back here,
So using those templates in code, and this I would add to your like SendGrid.js file. It's not really that hard. We just change a few things. So previously when we created the message object, we were adding in the subject, the HTML, and the text. Instead, what you want to do if you're sending it out using a template, you set the template ID and dynamic template data. So template ID is whatever the ID of the template is, and dynamic template data, that's where you put in those fields that will then get injected into the places where you have placeholder values. Okay? So that's how you send it with it.
Data, just data.
Well, that's a parameter here to this function. Right, so I need to give it something, right? But that's going to change based on like what template am I creating or things like that. Changes on how you, based on how you implement it. So those are the two values that you have to set for a template. Yes, what is the ID of the template and what data do you want to use? So you can try that out if your account is working and see if that goes through. Same question? Yep.
How do we determine which template to use?
Well, I'm just writing a function here. Okay. So template ID and data. When I call this, right? Whoever called this would know. This function doesn't know. This function is just a simple like. This is how you do it, right? So you put in the template ID and the data. Okay. Right. So I'm just kind of creating a utility to say, okay, this is kind of what it's going to look like.
So font, send, confirm account. Instead of template ID, just confirm account.
Right. Yeah. So if you need something like to send the confirm email, yeah, you can call it send confirm email, and yeah, the only thing you need to know is some information about the user. So I'd take like the user object. If you're looking at the auth example, that's the way I've implemented it. I just take in a user because that's all the data I need is basically on the user object. Although, actually, if I'm passing a URL, I probably would need the request as well. Because at least the way I set up this example, I'm just passing the token off to my view, not a full URL. So you might need the request object. Although, no, you don't need the request object because I can get that from here. I've got my host name and port, so that's what I need. Yeah. Yeah, so all you need, if you're going to write a method to send the verification email, send the reset password email, you just need the user object. You just need some information about the user, that's it. Everything else is predefined from that. Other things you might want to set when you're sending out emails. There are some features in terms of tracking in SendGrid, and you can turn these things off or on. So if you add in track settings, there's actually 3 different kinds of tracking that SendGrid does. There is click tracking, open tracking, and subscription tracking. So click tracking is it tracks any links that the user clicks on in the email, and it'll put that in your dashboard so you can see if the user clicked on the link or not. So if you set that to enable true, then it will enable the click tracking, and when you enable the click tracking, it will actually change the URL that you have. It actually rewrites the URL, so if you look at the email. So if you turn that off, that can be helpful for debugging to kind of see what is the actual email. And it's also special if you're helpful if you're doing like security things, like the password reset and the confirm account. I don't necessarily care if users are clicking on that link or not, or I may not want to know. That might be privacy things. So you can turn that off. Open tracking tracks whether or not the users actually read the email. And the way it does that is it puts a very small image down at the bottom of the email, and it basically when Outlook or whatever gets that email, you tell it to show the images, it downloads that image and it tracks that. So it can track whether your users have read it, have opened it that way. And subscription tracking, I can't remember what that one's for, but I think that's for like the unsubscribe thing. So you can turn those things off or on. You just say create tracking seconds, and that's either subscription tracking enable, open tracking enable, etc. Those are not as well documented. You can find about them, but that's how you change that stuff. So let's talk about the general process of a few different problems that you might want to solve with this. So a common problem that you're going to run into is email verification. In general, when your users register an account, they can provide any email address, right? They don't necessarily have to provide one that they own, right? I could go out to an account, to a website and sign up as johndoe@example.com, right? But do I own that do I own that email? Not really. In our interest, though, we'd rather have people create real accounts with real emails, right? So oftentimes, one of the things that we'll do is in order to confirm that they actually own the email, we send them an initial confirmation email to say, click on this link to prove you are this person actually. And generally speaking, until you do that, your account's in kind of an unverified status. Some websites don't even let you log in if your account is not verified, or some just limit what you can do. But in general, it should be limited so that users have a reason to go verify it. And oftentimes we limit it because we don't want spam bots to just randomly enter an email address, create a bunch of fake accounts, and we want to at least force them to go have to set up an email to, put another barrier in their way. So that's one of those things. Oftentimes, a lot of websites will delete any unverified accounts after 30 to 90 days, just to prevent any sort of spam or abuse. Obviously, you can't do that if you're taking money. But the way around that is don't take money until you've verified their account. So that's one of those things to kind of consider. So this is a very common thing. Pretty much every website wants you at some point to confirm your email, unless for some reason you're so anonymous that you don't even ask for emails. But usually you need to do that as a precursor to be able to send them anything. If you're going to send them marketing, usually you should at least verify their email before you start sending them marketing material. That's the ethical thing to do. So the way that we solve that is we kind of go through this verification process. We start initially when you register the account, we're going to set verified to false. So we're going to have some sort of flag on your account, like it is email verified, is account verified. We'll put that on the users table, and we'll initially start that as false or 0. And then when you register, we immediately send you an email containing a special token. Oftentimes, we also want a page to do this, not just at registration time, because oftentimes that initial email gets lost. So you always want a way to do this if you do it again, even if they miss that email, but oftentimes we send it at verification. So I need to send them some sort of token, right? And that token really needs to be secure because I need them to not be able to guess it or fake it. Right? So if that token is just their email address, for instance, can they guess that easily? Probably, right? What if it's just their user ID? Well, maybe they can guess that too, right? So we need something that they can't fake, right? So we've learned about using JWT to create tokens for logging in. This is a really another good place to use JWT. So you use JWT to create a token for that email verification. So you send that to them as part of a link. So you follow this link, and part of that link, and that's part of why it's really long, is because it may have a long token like this in it. So they follow that link. Once they follow that link, their account is verified. That's basically how you solve it, right? Overarching thing. You want to make sure that when we create these tokens that we have to use a different secret than we use for authentication. And the reason for that is if we use the same secret, now this token that we've just given, they can use to log in. And that could be a problem, right? Because that's opposed to maybe using your username and password to log in. So make sure that you're using a different secret, and that way they can't just say use it to log in to the thing. Oftentimes you also may want to put in some sort of type in there to say this is what kind of token is it. Is it a email verification token? Is it a password reset token, or what kind of thing is it? Either way, we need to make sure it has a different secret to encrypt it. Okay, so the general process of implementing this, we need a few pages, right? So they can make a post request. So let's say they post to account register, they create their account, right? That would be one place where we'd send the verification email. You'd also have a page like the verify email page of some sort. This could be a get or a post. But basically they need to go to that page. That triggers it, right? Either of those two routes. That's going to then have the link, right? And that link should point to something like this. It should point to account, verify email, token. Now remember it's a link, right? Remember it's a link in the email, right? Links are always what type of method? You follow a link, what HTTP method does it come through as? It always comes through GET. So whatever you put here has to be a GET. It can't be post, because you can't put a form in an email.
Is this going to be done in API?
What do you mean?
Well, these posts, I see posts there.
This needs to be done with actual front end stuff. This is not a web API. I'm saying if they registered their account. Like, this is the registration page. I mean, that could be in the API too, but these two, the verify email pages here, these need to not be in the API. Yeah, this is the regular route. So what I'm putting in there is the token at the end. So that follows. So I can then extract the token, check it. If the token's good and it's the right type, then I can go ahead and mark the account as verified and follow this. So that's basically the process that you have to go. I think that should be enough, given everything we've talked about, to kind of know how to do that. My guess is. Not boy. The only part of the code that I would mention is this is what I would do to generate the token. So put in the payload, I would put in user ID, the email address, and the type is verified email. Grab the secret. If you notice, I'm grabbing SendGrid.secret, not auth.secret, and then set it, sign a JWT token, give it some expiration date. Expiration time here should be a lot shorter, right? So this might expire in an hour, would be long. Versus your logins, maybe your logins is a lot longer. Maybe they can use a login for 24 hours. This should be much shorter. The rest of that you can kind of work through with what we've talked about, how to send email and how to put the data in there. So that's kind of the process, right? So I do have a working code example. If you're looking at the auth examples, I think let me start it up. So if you're looking at my example, the place where this is hooked up, say local, oh, you can go in here. There, localhost 3002. So when I log in, I've got it here on the profile page. So you click profile, verify email address. That then sends an email. If I looked in here, I think it's in, all of these have been showing up in my junk.
Is this off example?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what we're looking at here. Did that not send?
Is there any way to have it where it says verify email sent? It may not really be sent, where it kind of does make sure that it doesn't display that message unless it really does send it.
What do you mean?
Well, it appears on the page, right? I mean, that's part of your HTML.
Yeah. Well, you'd have to pass an error back if it did. So the problem is there's a lot of things that can go wrong, and sometimes the result doesn't even tell you if it went through or not. So here it is. That's basically what it would look like. So I've got my please click the link below, and that could go in here, but that link is expired, so that one's not working. But that's roughly the process. I can look at here, see what went wrong. Terminal. Yeah, I mean, for me it says verify email sent, HTTP 2002. So according to that, it was sent, but I'm not seeing it in my inbox. And sometimes it just shows up in my junk.
Yeah,
but I'm not seeing it in my
Sometimes
note.
it just takes a while.
Yeah, sometimes it just takes a while, so I don't have a new one. But basically that's the gist of it. So you can look at the code of how I set that up, but there's really not too much to it. So that's the general process of doing that. Another common place where this comes in is if you need to have the user reset a forgotten password or change it for, they've forgotten their password. So in there, we need some way for them to prove their identity. Because if your users say, well, they forget their password, right? You don't want just an attacker to say, okay, well, I forgot the password for Paul's account. Let me just enter Paul's email and set a new password. Oftentimes, it's actually easier to get through the password reset functionality than to guess the person's password. Oftentimes that's the most vulnerable piece. So you have to be a little bit more cautious when you're implementing that part of the security. So generally, to prove the user's identities, most websites are going to use prove it via email or text messages, sometimes via an authenticator device or application. Essentially, what we're doing is substituting the something you know of your password with something you have, which would be your phone or your email account or such. It's important in here that we never reveal the user's current password. Don't do it. If at any point you reveal the current user's current password, you're shot. Don't do that. That includes a common mistake that people make is when you do a password reset, it tells you you can't choose the password that you already have. Because now you just told me what their password was. And that seems like a good security thing to some people because it's like, well, okay, I'm going to force you to change it if you're resetting it. But you've just revealed something more dangerous, which is that I can now try and maybe figure out what your password is already. Huh? That's kind of a mixed thing. Some people have different feelings about that. It's like, well, okay, maybe I should do that check, maybe I shouldn't do that. Yeah. So, but I would say that's part of the problem. It's like, well, you just told me what it was, and that's actually can be a lot of information. The fact that you hash them, if you're properly hashing a password and not storing the original password, then in theory you should have no way to show the current password. If you see any website that tells you your password is blah, when you go to forget the password or reset password, that means they're not hashing your password. So you should be especially worried about that. But that's one of those areas where people forget. Because you can hash the password, but still block the user from choosing the same password again. So the general process there is ask user for either their username or their email address. It can be one or the other. You can implement it either way. The way I've implemented it in the example is that you enter the email address. Then you want to, just like we did with the previous one, send them a token. You want to send them a token to say that includes kind of the same information that you did for verifying the email. They're then going to follow the link, and then that form is where they enter the new password and the confirm password. You then change the password, assuming those are good, and then the user logs in with the new password. So to kind of implement that, you end up needing sort of 4 pages at least. So they're going to start here, right? And usually they start from the login screen. They say forgotten password. So you're usually going to start from the login screen and then go to your reset password page. They enter the email or the username. You go in here, post to that form that says, okay, I've got the email or address, and then go send out a confirmation email. One thing you shouldn't do for security purposes, don't tell them that their email address is wrong. If their email address does not exist in your database, you say, okay, it's all good. Because you also don't want to leak that they have an account or don't have an account. Does that make sense? This is one of those things, again, because of the security, there's a lot of vulnerabilities in a lot of these common systems. You want to reveal as little information as possible. And unfortunately, that sometimes means not telling you there's an error when there is an error. Because that error, the fact that there's an error is very helpful to attackers. Right? Just like saying your password, you already have that password. That's something they can use. Or the fact that it tells them whether or not that email is in the system is also something you can use. Because if I can figure out all the email addresses all the users that have that, well, then I can now start guessing passwords of all the users that I know exist. Right? So you don't want to reveal in here. If the user doesn't exist, you just go ahead and say, yep, it's all happy, check your email. If your user exists, you'll have an email. Otherwise, you won't. So we send that. User follows the link again. That would have a token again. Going to come back up here. So now I have a route that has the token in it. Right. So this route, this side of it didn't have the token. This side does. So we check the token, and then so this one gives them a form, enter their password and confirm password. We go down here. Do I need to check the token again here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
That's where the
absolutely
change.
Because this is where it actually gets changed. So if I don't check the token here, users can skip all the way to the end here. So I have to make sure that I'm checking the token and the get route here as well as the post route. It has to be valid in both places.
Seems complicated, but it's not.
It's you can look at the example. It's a lot because it seems like it should be something relatively simple, but it requires a lot more pages. So the way, at least if you look at my example, the way I ended up implementing this reset password, you can define those 4 pages as actually separate views. The way I had defined them was all in one file. So we have just basically sections. So I have an if, else if, etc. So basically inside of this reset password handlebars, I've got sort of all 4 of those views, if that makes sense, because they're all 4 different states effectively of the same page. But you could split those up as 4 different pages as well. Either way, you do end up with each of those being 4 different routes. So to implement a reset password, you'll see I've got these 4 routes here. I've got reset password as a post, reset password get and post, but those 2 with the token. Does that make sense? That's kind of the way you put it together.
The first one's not very
The first one's because all it needs to do is render the empty page, right? The empty form. If I'm looking at this in the browser, let me go back to the login screen. So the place I would normally link it, this is where you're normally going to see that. You'll log in, hit forgot password. I type in the email address, so admin, example.com, send. So all that you saw there is in, those pieces are all in the reset password. So that's kind of the general process that you do. In there, both of those require a single email to be sent out, and that's where SendGrid comes in. Is you call SendGrid at this point, they go then go through that and come back. So, and to generate that token, I would just say, well, it just needs to be a different token. So here I've set a reset password. So I know if it's a token to verify your email or if it's a token to reset your password. So that's kind of how it works. Those are things I want you to kind of dig in. The reason I don't want to go too deep on the code on that is I want you to dig in and understand it kind of on your own. Because if I just show you the code and walk you through the code, you're not going to really learn how to do it yourself. So I just wanted to give you like, here's kind of how you do it. Here's the overview. So other reasons you might send an email. We kind of mentioned these at the beginning, and you should think about these and what makes sense for your website, for what you're building. You know, oftentimes inform users, newsletters, things like that. You know, once you understand how to send emails, you can send it for really any reason. But there should be something in your website that you think about, like, well, okay, yes, there should be something to reset your password and verify your account, but what else are you sending emails about, right? And a lot of times that is, you know, that email is a way to draw your users back to your website.
How many times these things automatically go out? There?
That's a great question. It's beyond the scope of what I'm going to talk about today. But there is a package called cron, which is amazing at sending things out on a scheduled basis. It actually will let you do anything on a scheduled basis. So if you want to learn about how to do things on a schedule, go look at that package. There's a Medium article here that will kind of walk you through how to do it. It's really not hard. But it kind of, huh?
You should call it upward.
But anyway.
Marketing emails, they get peppered with them on Twitter.
Oh, yeah. So that's what I would use if you need to set up scheduled emails, is use cron. But that's really beyond the scope of what I wanted to talk about here. So I'll let you look at that as makes sense. Cool. So at least I got you started. That was my whole goal today, is to just get you started. Like, here's kind of how you write the code. But I'll let you kind of apply it to what makes sense for your application.